By all accounts, negotiations between the government and the Greens over a carbon tax have reached a tricky phase. The parties are in serious disagreement over a number of critical points, in particular the level of compensation for what's called gassy coal mines and also electricity generators. Prime Minister Julia Gillard met again yesterday with Greens leader Bob Brown in a bid to get through these differences, and the Greens are launching a TV ad to gather support for action on carbon. Senator Brown joins you in our Parliament House studio. Bob Brown, welcome to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
Before we get to the issue of a carbon tax, can I ask you about Tony Abbott's move for a plebiscite on a carbon price? Is that a good idea?
No, it's another waste of money. It's a good political manoeuvre, perhaps, but it's a waste of tens of millions of public money for an indicative plebiscite, which would be binding on no one, and which Tony Abbott would lose. If the question is put to the public, do you want to have taxpayers funding the polluters, as Tony Abbott would have it, at a cost of $720 per household by the end of this decade, or would you prefer the polluters to be funding households to tackle climate change? The polls show that by 2 to 1 people prefer the polluters to be paying. We'd see not just the 70 million of taxpayers' money, but a huge amount of money coming in from the polluters, which the households couldn't match, because that's the nature of funding of lobbyists these days, and householders would be the losers. But it's very, very clear to me everywhere I go and explain that Tony Abbott is actually going to fund the polluters by taking money out of householders, out of their pockets. People don't want that, and that's a debate we're going to have if we come to agreement with the Gillard government, along with the independents in the Carbon Committee in the coming days.
And I'll come to that in a second, but we just heard Tony Abbott speaking on AM, and pretty powerful pitch to say, why not give the population a direct say over such a major economic reform?
Well, why didn't he have a plebiscite on the invasion of Iraq? He didn't even, and his government at the time didn't even ask the people of Australia about that. They didn't ask the Parliament. The same with the deployment of troops to Afghanistan, which has cost billions of dollars. There's been no attempt to ask the people of Australia or the Parliament.
Nevertheless,
there's a double standard at play here, and it's a tricky political move, but one that's very expensive on the public purse and a abrogation of his own responsibility. What he's saying here is, I didn't get government, so I want to sideline government while I go with taxpayer-funded plebiscites on various issues. Well, Abbott's losing on this one. He will lose out on it, and we won't be supporting this extremely expensive way of getting an opinion, but not binding Parliament.
But in being seen, or if you're portrayed as arguing against people, giving people a direct say on this issue, are the government and the Greens likely to be portrayed as being too scared to leave it to the people to decide, that you can't persuade the people in the case for a price on carbon?
Well, I'm very confident about our position, and I know that there's enormous strength of support for our position amongst the Green voters and the wider populace. And this will come down to a debate, if we get agreement in the Climate Committee in the Parliament. Remember, Tony Abbott believes that there should be a program to tackle climate change. He's not saying there shouldn't be one. All he's saying is that householders should pay, not the polluters.
Okay.
And if we're going to get into that debate, the proper place to have that is on the floor of the Parliament. We'll be there on the floor of the Parliament to take him on, because he will lose on it.
Well, I guess you'll only take him on if there is... more broadly, if there is an agreement within the Multi-Party Climate Committee on a carbon tax. And I understand that meetings on Thursday and Friday between the Greens and the government were extremely tense. You met again with the Prime Minister over the weekend. How would you characterise negotiations at the moment?
Well, they're businesslike, and so they should be. We have a huge responsibility here, and we're taking that responsibility on our shoulders. We want to see a good scheme come out of this. As you'll know, there's a difference between Labor's position and the Greens and the Independents. We're all part of this, but we want to see this action be the best tailored for this country facing the awesome threat of climate change with destruction of the Murray-Darling Basin food productivity, the Great Barrier Reef, our snowfields, the eastern seaboard, and so on. These and a huge impost on the future economy and job creation of our own nation. Now, we're prepared to take that on. We are, however, at difference on. You mentioned polluting coal mines. The Greens' position is that the people who cause the fossil fuel burners who cause the problem ought to be paying for that pollution. It's a very simple polluters pay proposal that we have. Now, government, like Tony Abbott, but less so, is under the enormous pressure of the polluting industries and would like to put more of the burden onto the people. We don't agree with that. If there's money coming from a scheme which is paid by the polluters, that should go into renewable energy. We want a scheme that has upward flexibility. We didn't get that last time, but we want that this time. That means that as the rest of the world moves on, we can move on with them to have a scheme which further tackles the pollution, but also brings in renewable energy and brings in the options which are going to give us a clean, green and secure economic future.
In terms of the rest of the world moving on, a commissioned report from Deloitte Access out today says a carbon price will, if it's in the absence of a global emissions trading scheme and also in the presence of us maintaining our 20% renewable energy target, a carbon price would be responsible for the loss of 78,000 jobs, and with no global trading scheme in place, 156,000 jobs will go.
Well, if we don't tackle climate change, 128,000 jobs will go in the Murray-Darling Basin. 67,000 jobs will be lost out of the Great Barrier Reef. A $6 billion economy, which puts money into the local economy, that is from the Barrier Reef, will go, and I'm talking here in the coming decades, whereas the big polluters that that survey may have involved export huge amounts, if not a majority of their money, out of the country.
Okay.
And we are concerned about jobs here, and we are interested in helping communities to transfer to the clean, green and renewable future that we're talking about responsibly in these talks with the government. Let me say this about Julia Gillard. I have found her businesslike. I have found her almost unflappable in the very tough circumstances she's in at the moment. She is putting her mind to the business of the country when it comes to these talks with Greg Combet and the Treasurer, and so are we. So there's a bit of a sideshow with Tony Abbott off to the side there in the hands of the big polluters. But when it comes to the national interest, that's what we're tackling.
And just briefly and finally, Bob Brown, the poll numbers for Julia Gillard are very poor, just 27% support for Labor, two-party preferred over the weekend in Nielsen. If Julia Gillard is replaced as leader by her party, would the Labor Greens alliance that you signed, would that still be in place? Did you sign that with Julia Gillard or with Labor? Yes,
we did sign it with Julia Gillard. And
so if she's gone, so is the agreement?
We would have to look at a new leader with at the circumstances of whether that agreement was going to continue or not. But that's up to Labor. What I know is the Greens are stable. We are growing in this parliament. We are acting responsibly. We're smart about it. We're economically diligent. And we'll continue to bring that to this parliament regardless of what the other parties are doing.
And I'm sure you're not a betting man, but what are the odds of an agreement in the Multi-Party Climate Committee on a carbon price?
Well, it's still a work in progress, but I can assure everybody that we are working, we recognise this has to be a compromise. It's not going to be a green outcome, but we are determined to get the best outcome for householders, for renewable energy in this country, and for the future of our economy in a world which is moving towards tackling climate change, and we have to take our responsibility there as well.
Senator Brown, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thanks, Fran.
Senator Brown is the leader of the Greens. It's 7 minutes to 8.